We received a phone call from the editor of the local newspaper. He's had an email from Crawford.
1 minute I'm the editor of a local newspaper, the next thing I'm an undercover international manhunt working with the police to track a killer.
Police received an emergency call from a very distressed female stating that she believed she'd found her father murdered at his flat in Sutton. So I was called in to assess whether it actually was a murder we were dealing with. Lots of different thoughts go through your head when you're on the way to a suspected murder scene. But you've got to keep an open mind. You've got to be careful not to prejudge the situation and corrupt your decision making by assuming what you're going to meet.
So the victim was Michael Ryan. He was, I believe, 67 years of age, with 2 grown-up children. When the investigation team were first called there, they were struck by how clean and tidy and in good order the flat was. There was no signs of forced entry. The doors and the integrity of the doors were intact, the windows were intact. It was on the 2nd floor, I believe.
The first thing that hit me inside the flat was the stench, and that could have only been a decomposing body. I know that smell. And then upon further examination, we found the body in a bedroom wrapped in a rug, and it was wedged underneath a bookcase. That's some kind of crude attempt to conceal the body. The window of the bedroom was slightly open, and there was tissue rammed in the keyhole of the bedroom door.
The tissue was to prevent the smell of a decomposing body escaping from the room.
They found the deceased with a towel over his head. He'd been there for some time.
So there was little doubt it was a murder investigation. People don't commit suicide and end up wrapped in rugs.
Forensic investigators immediately scour the scene for evidence.
So upon first inspection, it didn't look like a murder scene at all. Everything was very clean and very tidy. We did notice an excessive amount of cleaning products in the flat, so we suspected a clean-up operation had taken place.
Often with crime scenes, when they've been cleaned and tidied, you don't naturally see the full extent of the episode or the incident that's taken place. And that's why we use forensic science to reveal and identify things that aren't naturally visible to the naked eye. And one of the techniques that was used was the use of luminol, which is a scientific technique which then reacts with bodily fluids and certain other agents. And when it's passed over with a particular light source, it will luminesce, thereby revealing blood or certain other fluids.
Well, what started off as a normal flat and a non-crime scene quickly turned into a pretty horrific scene. There was a huge amount of blood in that crime scene.
Now that the team can see the extent of the violence, they can piece together the geography of the attack.
There were 2 principal areas of bloodstaining. One was in the living room, so an attack had occurred in the living room. One was in the doorway of the deceased bedroom, so there had been an attack in the doorway, and then there was blood in the bedroom. So there was potentially 3 areas of attack.
With the search of the flat not revealing a murder weapon, investigators are keen to establish what led to Michael's death.
Decomposition of a body in that scenario makes it a lot more difficult to establish the cause of death. But the pathologist was able to find impact wounds on the victim's skull.
Michael had died from blunt force trauma to his head. The majority of the blows had landed to the right side of his head. And I think from memory there was 12 separate blows that had landed. For me, it left no doubt that whoever it was intended to kill Michael.
Police have now established the cause of death, but not when Michael was killed due to the decomposition of the body, so have to turn to specialist forensics for clues.
My neighbour downstairs, she was saying to me, I've got the most awful fly situation in the flat. They were all over the place in her flat and it was driving her mad.
When bodies decompose, flies and pupa are naturally there, and on this particular case, it can give us an indication as to how long a body may have been in that particular place or in that particular condition. So the entomology report led us to believe that the victim had been there for about 8 days prior to the family and the police discovering him. The fact that it was 8 days before anybody knew was a real dilemma for me. I wasn't sure how somebody could have maintained this cover or this deceit for a longer period of time, which had effectively led or thrown people off the track. And for me, that showed that somebody had employed some fairly considered tradecraft to keep interested people away and to buy themselves some time.
With no signs of forced entry into the flat, it was likely Michael knew the perpetrator. So the team delve into his life to see if there are any clues as to who might want him dead.
He was a retired heating and ventilation engineer. He had 2 grown-up daughters, and he was divorced from his ex-wife. They'd been together for 43 years.
He had some money and was spending a lot of his time travelling, and I think he'd recently discovered Thailand and was spending some time travelling around Thailand.
He and I would meet outside and just wander up and down with our dogs talking. And that's how I got to know him, really. He was a very quiet, very sweet man, very nice chap.
Who would want to murder a 67-year-old man in his home? A man who had no previous convictions, had never been in trouble with the police, lived a quiet life. Who would want to do that? Why? And what had led to that situation happening on that day at that time? He was last seen on the 1st of September, which was his birthday, where he'd been out with friends and family. I think he'd gone to a pub and had a meal and, you know, done what anybody does on their birthday, and then went back to his home in Sutton.
We know from the evidence generally that he was in a good mood, that he was happy, and that all appeared to be fine.
And then over the next sort of 4 or 5 days, the daughters and, in fact, Michael's ex-wife were receiving text messages from Michael.
At the time, Michael's daughter was very keen to tell her father that he was going to become a granddad because she was pregnant. And she tried ringing him repeatedly. She sent messages to him, and all she got back was some strangely worded text messages.
That message said that he had broken his phone, but he was able to send texts, but not able to receive calls or make calls. And it said, I'm sorry, I can't take you to the airport on the 4th of September because I'm going away on business.
So, following the increased suspicion in and around these messages, daughter went to the address to see Dad, to see Michael, let herself in through the front door and was immediately confronted with this awful smell. But Michael had installed a lock on his bedroom door, and daughter didn't have a key to that room. So at that stage, she then called a friend whose brother was a locksmith, who arrived and drilled the lock. They forced entry and obviously tragically found Michael in that room.
But something wasn't adding up for the investigators.
Knowing that Michael had been dead for several days, it was quite apparent that it wasn't him sending text messages on his phone. So the big question was, who was sending those messages?
Police investigating the murder of Michael Ryan in September 2008 are looking at his movements in the months leading up to his death to try to establish who could want to cause him harm.
Michael, during his retirement, had decided to travel and had gone to Thailand. And whilst there, he'd befriended a fellow Brit. They'd obviously got on, and during the course of their time together in Thailand, they'd become quite good friends.
Mike said he got talking to this chap, and he was from Scotland, and he'd divorced. He'd gone off to travel, but that he'd run out of money now, and he wanted to go home, but he couldn't afford to go home. And Mike said he was a nice person anyway, and I think after a while he sort of said to the chap, well, all right, you can come and stay with me for a while.
Within weeks of meeting in Thailand, Michael's new lodger has arrived in the UK.
Michael's friend came through, and he just looked at me, and I said, well, you know, I hope you have a nice time and it's nice here, etc., etc. But he didn't actually say anything at all. He just looked.
The agreement with the flatmate was that he would be there for a short space of time, and he would look for work. It appeared that he didn't. He spent most of his time watching television, getting up rather late, and that was a cause of some irritation.
But Michael's frustrations with his lodger went beyond just his laziness.
Michael became suspicious. He wasn't receiving his mail. He wasn't receiving his bank statements.
Michael had expressed his concerns to his daughter that potentially his flatmate may be responsible, because the timing was coincidental in the sense that these bank statements were starting to go missing. He probably realised he didn't know a huge amount about his flatmate.
Michael had a significant amount of money in one of his accounts, in excess of £100,000. And he was concerned about that, to the point where he chose to move it into a separate account, and he gave all the requisite documents concerning that account to his daughter to look after. That's how concerned he was about his new tenant.
He just wasn't the type of man to sling somebody out. He wouldn't do that. But he did say to me one day, I've put a lock on my bedroom door. And I went, why? He said, I don't trust him. He said, I just don't trust him.
Michael's lodger was 45-year-old Stuart Crawford, someone the police are now keen to talk to. But contacting him is another matter.
So, in order to try and find Stuart, we obviously used the sort of the more conventional approach of trying to get hold of him, mobile phone, couldn't get any contact with him. He had no ties to the area, so we had very little to sort of grasp from the beginning in order to locate him. So the inquiry team spoke to the residents of the flat in the block, and interestingly, neighbours came forward.
I'd gone down with the dog for a quick walk, came back upstairs, and my neighbour was standing there saying, did you hear all that noise yesterday coming from Mike's flat? And I said, no, I was probably up at the hospital. So she said, it terrible noise, she said. And all of a sudden, who comes in but the chap that was living with Mike? He stopped and petted the dog and said to him, what on earth was all that noise going on in the flat yesterday? She said to him, it sounded like somebody was being murdered. And he didn't bat an eyelid, and he just said, we were moving some furniture about. Yeah, he said, we decided to move some furniture. And I went, oh, right, okay. And anyway, he just went in.
The neighbour's account put Stuart Crawford in Michael's flat around the time he died. So detectives delved deeper.
We decided to carry out a financial profile on both the victim and the tenant.
And one of the most telling revelations was that on the 2nd of September, the day that we felt was the day that Michael was murdered, a significant amount of money, some £6,500, was transferred out of his account and transferred into the account of Stuart Crawford. So this development clearly highlighted that Stuart Crawford had some very, very difficult questions that he needed to answer. Why had he not been available? Where had he gone?
With not much known about Crawford, police make inquiries to learn as much as they can about him.
We knew that he was divorced. We spoke to his ex-wife who lived in the north of England, and she told us that their volatile relationship often resulted in violence towards her, and when they got divorced he went back to Scotland to live with his mother. We discovered that Crawford had actually defrauded his own father. He applied for a £15,000 bank loan in his father's name, stole the money and disappeared to Thailand, which is actually when he met Michael Ryan.
Having taken all of this into account, it was clear to me, and certainly clear to the senior investigating officer, that this was now a manhunt.
To track Stuart Crawford down, police trace his movements around the time of the murder.
Stuart Crawford had gone to Sutton Library, where he'd signed in under his real name, given his mobile phone number, which we could link to him, in order to gain access to the computers that they have there, the public access computers. And whilst there, we know that he accessed one of the accounts of Michael Ryan, one of his bank accounts. We know that Michael Ryan at that same time was still at home, online himself. The assumption was that he was able to access Michael's bank accounts was because he'd lived in the flat. He'd had access to Michael's information and to his post. And obviously, Michael expressed his concerns about bank statements going missing, correspondence going missing. He would have had all of the information he needed to gain access to the accounts.
The visit to Sutton Library was no doubt to check what funds the deceased had and what funds he had access to. No sums were transferred or withdrawn.
So Stuart left Sutton Library and made his way back to the flat where Michael was at home. And from what we know from witness testimony and from accounts given, that an argument then ensued.
I was on my way out to do some shopping probably, and I heard a lot of banging and crashing coming from Mike's flat. No idea what it was. I actually knocked on the door in case he'd fallen over and hurt himself, but there was no reply. So I just went out, assuming he was okay. But of course it wasn't.
We know from our neighbours and their testimony and their account, together with the post-mortem, together with the luminol, together with all the professional opinion from those involved, that what happened next was a violent and sustained and ultimately fatal attack on Michael Ryan.
Police now have no doubt that Stuart Crawford is Michael's killer, and using his financial footprint, start to trace his movements after the murder.
He returned to the Sutton Library within about 25 minutes of the killing, and then accessed the account again and transferred £6,500 to an account that he had recently opened, recently being the 27th of August.
Having done that, he then left, made his way back to the flat, stopping briefly at a nearby supermarket in order to buy cleaning products and air fresheners. And then having returned home, he would have set about the very significant clean-up operation that he needed to perform.
Instead of fleeing, it appears Crawford stays in the flat alongside the body for several days.
So Stuart didn't leave straight away because he couldn't get access to the funds. So Stuart needed to buy some time in order for the funds, £6,500, to be readily accessible. And in order for him to buy that time, he had to take on the persona of Michael Ryan in the form of text messages, communications, and also try to keep Michael's family at bay.
So one of the text messages that Crawford sent on Michael's phone was to say that he was going away on business.
That was ultimately a bit of a downfall for him because the spelling of business was incorrectly spelt. And that was a red flag to one of Michael's daughters, which led to her going to her dad's address and finding her father's body.
Michael's body was discovered on the 10th of September, 8 days after his murder, giving Crawford enough time to withdraw his victim's money.
Stuart Crawford had requested on one occasion a PIN card change. So he'd obviously taken control of one of the accounts, and that account was the one that he could physically remove cash from. And what we could see was a number of transactions from cash points through the local area. So we focused our efforts around the CCTV in those particular locations where we were able to see Stuart Crawford withdrawing money from cash points. We were then able to piece together his movements from those different activities to build a real timeline and a storyboard of where he went and what he did.
But then, police discover something that could have a devastating effect on the investigation.
So putting all of those activities together and all of that CCTV, we were able to track Stuart, finally ending up with him paying cash at a travel agent's for a one-way ticket to Bangkok. Our biggest concern at that point was that Stuart had left the country.
After contacting the Border Force Agency, their worst fears are confirmed.
Sure enough, he had flown out to Thailand on the 5th of September. We knew that Crawford had been in Thailand for 5 days before we were even alerted about the murder, so he had a significant head start. He had plenty of time to cover his tracks. We didn't have a clue where he was. We knew that he'd flown into Bangkok, but he could have been anywhere in Thailand. He could have gone across the border to Cambodia or Burma.
It was a major blow. This was now going to take a significant amount of time in order to bring Stuart back, to extradite him back to the UK.
Over a year has passed since the murder of 68-year-old Michael Ryan in Sutton, southwest London. And the police investigation has ground to a halt after the main suspect, Stuart Crawford, fled to Bangkok without a trace.
I was editor of the Sutton Guardian and a couple of other newspapers in South London for around 4 years. Sutton's a really quiet area of South London, so it's relatively crime-free. So when there's a murder in Sutton, it's front page news. From our point of view, the last story we wrote was the murder suspect fleeing to a foreign country. After that, nothing. That was it. As far as we were concerned, he'd gone.
But that was all about to change.
It was a Friday. I'd finished all the papers, all the deadlines had passed, the next deadlines you didn't have to worry about till next week. I was thinking about what time I could go to the pub, and then the email landed. The email was short and to the point. It said, "I have information about the brutal murder of Michael Ryan. I want to tell you my story." The email was signed by Stuart Crawford. It was a name I knew well. It was really, really surprising to get an email like that in my inbox. We get tip-offs every day. We get stories every day. Not all of them are true and not all the people are real. But my initial reaction was, this is something different. And I was getting really quite excited about the fact that this may be the man the police were looking for.
We received a phone call from the editor of the local newspaper. I recall Danny walking into my office and saying, "You won't believe this, but the local editor's on the phone and he's had an email from Crawford." We were sceptical, but we went to see Matt as soon as possible. I think Danny and I turned up in a cloud of dust probably before he put the phone down.
I knew I had to prove his identity. I knew I had to get something from him that only he would have. So we went back and forth. I didn't want to scare him off with too many questions, but I needed to know more. So I said that we were interested, but can you provide some more details? And he sent me another email at 3:55 a.m, again with his typical blunt style. It said, "I will tell you my story, then return to the UK to face the music. I will call you when the time's right. I want £20,000 for my full and accurate story. Half now, half after, non-negotiable." So my initial reaction was, £20,000? We don't spend £20 on stories, so he's come to the wrong place. But there was no way I could let him go. So I had to ask a few more questions. I had to get him to send us some ID. So I asked him outright, I need you to prove who you are.
In his next message, he not only agrees to send ID, but he also makes some startling admissions.
There were some fairly major revelations in them. I can't live with what I've done. I'll come back and confess all. The phraseology was very, very clear in that this particular individual was taking responsibility for what they'd done.
Eventually, he sent me his driver's license. And there it was, Stuart Crawford, date of birth, picture. I thought, oh my gosh, we've got the real person on the end of this email. It was an incredible feeling of, this is real.
I remember feeling mixed emotions, really. I was stunned that somebody who'd committed such an appalling murder was now sending his driving licence to the local newspaper editor for £20,000 to tell his story. By the same token, I was really pumped by this because it had the potential to be a really good solution to finding this guy and getting him back to the UK to face justice.
But it's clear to the police that the only way to Crawford is through Matt.
The only way that we were able to really maintain that relationship and to keep effectively Stuart Crawford on the hook was for Matt to work on behalf of the police. So we sought authorities in order to use him as a tasked witness to maintain that covert relationship with Stuart Crawford so that we could, over a period of time, gain his confidence and start to withdraw some additional information, start to build an understanding of where he was overseas, and start to build that picture.
It was a surreal experience. 1 minute I'm the editor of a local newspaper, the next thing I'm an undercover international manhunt working with the police to trap a killer.
With the sting operation in full swing, the team knows that the only way to get their man is to make him believe that he will eventually get paid.
Crawford was clearly desperate. From his emails, he wanted money. He started with £20,000, he knocked it down to £5,000, and then he wanted £1,000 immediately. That tells you something. He also was scared of getting arrested by the Thai authorities. He told us that his visa was running out, and that put some fear into him as well.
I think Stuart Crawford genuinely believed that he was going to be paid for his story, and that was never going to happen. The reality was, though, he didn't know that.
We were keen to exploit that, but we needed more information from him. We needed to know where he was.
Locating Crawford is only part of the challenge, as investigators have to navigate the Thai legal system in order to get their suspect back to the UK.
Ultimately, we had to secure an international arrest warrant and extradite Crawford. The bureaucracy and red tape was through the roof. It was compounded by the fact that there was political unrest in Thailand at that time. So it was painstakingly slow.
Knowing that they're in for a long, arduous journey, the team have to find ways of slowing things down without spooking Crawford.
One of the key points to our strategy was, how do we maintain this relationship with Stuart, and how do we draw out the information we need, but also slow things down to a point to allow the legal process to run its course. And there were a number of different things that we did.
So there was a 6-hour time delay between Thailand and Britain. So we knew he couldn't enter into a back and forth with me. But we deliberately only sent him emails on a Friday afternoon. So we knew that he couldn't reply and I would be away for the weekend. And that gave us time to think. And that was the key here. We needed time to think.
But the delays are starting to make Crawford impatient.
Given the length of time between the email exchanges, 1 email a week, no action and everything taking so long, he started to get doubts. He started to believe that we weren't going to pay him anything and we weren't interested and we were just stringing him along.
With Crawford wavering, the team action their first plan to catch their suspect.
We still didn't know where Crawford lived, so one of the ways that we thought we could try and catch him was to use the money as bait to get him to meet me in person in Bangkok. We pretended that we were concerned about identity theft, or he could still not be who he said he was. He didn't take that well. He said, I know who I am. I'm not telling you any lies. Do you really want to do this deal or not? Do you want my story?
Having failed at the first hurdle, they try a different tack.
It was obvious that Crawford was becoming impatient. So on the back of that previous exchange, we said, well, look, if you're not happy to meet face to face, we need some reassurances that you're not going to sell your story to any other newspaper, right? So we're going to send you a contract. It's a standard journalistic contract which binds you to us and the fees and so on and so forth.
We sent the contract to slow the process down. We knew that if he had to post it to us, that could take days or even a week or more. He wasn't having it. He said, I really feel this is all bullshit and you're just stringing me along, maybe because you're in contact with the police and they're telling you to do this. So I'll make this very clear. Do things to my requests, as I want them, or we really don't have anything left to talk about. And we left it. And a day later, he wrote another email. I don't know what your game is, but I don't want to play anymore. I'm not wasting any more time waiting for you to reply to my emails. So it ends now. I'd approach other papers to see if they can help me, but we'll have no more contact with you. It felt like it was game over. We'd spent weeks on this. We didn't know whether we were going to hear from him again. It felt like it was the end.
18 months after fleeing the country following the murder of Michael Ryan, suspected killer Stuart Crawford has been unknowingly liaising with the police via a local newspaper. But before they can establish his exact whereabouts, the trail has gone cold.
Out of nowhere, he sent another email. I've signed the contract and I'm posting it to you. I think he changed his mind because he was desperate for the money.
Had everything on it that we could hope. It had been signed, it filled in his personal details, it had given an address in Thailand. It had such rich information on it that there was a real sense of relief. We submitted it to the Forensic Science Service and the laboratory, and they examined it, and yeah, sure enough, it had Stuart Crawford's fingerprints all over it.
That information just confirmed it was Crawford we were dealing with. He had some minor previous convictions, and we knew exactly that we had our man.
But we were still frustrated because we were at the hands of the Thai police and it was taking forever to get this international arrest warrant.
The team urgently need the warrant, but with Crawford desperate for his money, they make him believe that the contract hasn't arrived yet.
We still needed more time, and it was clear that we were beginning to run out of plausible reasons as to why this meeting and this exchange of cash couldn't happen. We'd used annual leave as delaying tactics. We'd even said, oh, you know, it's the lawyers in the newspaper, but they were wearing thin. But as luck would have it, the volcanic eruption in Iceland grounded all international flights, and it was an absolute godsend, literally.
While the volcano continues to cloud our skies tonight, there is little clarity.
The departure boards told another story, as delays and cancellations spread faster than the ash itself.
We told Stuart, oh, Stuart, we think the post might have been delayed because of all this volcanic ash. It may take a few more weeks. Are you okay to hang on?
And that really put the timeline back on track for us.
After 5 months and 60 emails between Crawford and the newspaper, the police have finally granted the international arrest warrant they need to apprehend their suspect.
Knowing we were so close to catching Crawford, we needed to set up the end game. We needed to set up the final part of the sting.
The initial plan was to lure Crawford to a hotel in Bangkok on the pretense of meeting Matt with a suitcase full of cash. But we didn't need to go through that ruse. Once we knew his address, we were able to instruct the Thai authorities to arrest him. It was on the 5th of August 2010, the Royal Thai Police went into Crawford's address and detained him.
Mixed emotions, really. Delighted he'd been arrested. Really disappointed we weren't there when it happened. We wanted to look him in the whites of his eyes when he got arrested. That was important to us, but not as important as him being arrested.
There was a real feeling of elation. I recall it was Danny that broke the news to me that he'd been arrested in Thailand, and the team were absolutely delighted. And at the close of play that day, Danny and I and most of the team went to a nearby pub to celebrate and consumed an inordinate amount of alcohol.
Months of worrying about whether this guy was going to go on the run or not. Months of making up excuses to keep him on the hook, and it was all over. He was nicked. He was in jail. He was in the Bangkok Hilton. His picture was on the media. You know, we got him.
After months in a Thai prison, Stuart Crawford is finally extradited back to Britain.
Crawford was accompanied by extradition officers on the flight from Bangkok to Heathrow. He asked what the sentencing guidelines were for manslaughter and murder. And he also said at one point, "Am I in the shit?" And he seemed to be the only person that didn't know the answer to that question at that time.
I was standing on the air bridge, you know, next to the aircraft, and as the aircraft sort of emptied, that was the first time I saw Stuart Crawford sat in between two detectives. And I remember thinking to myself, right, okay, this is the person that we've been chasing. This is the person that's been eluding us for all this time. In many ways, I think I felt that this was like the last page in the chapter for the police at that time. Now it was going to be in the hands of our barristers, and, you know, I guess maybe psychologically it was passing the baton over.
Due to the admissions Crawford made in his emails during the sting, the team are quietly confident he will plead guilty.
There were two counts on the indictment. One was murder, the other fraud. Stuart Crawford pleaded guilty to the fraud, but he pleaded not guilty to murder. And his defence at trial was self-defence. And in fact, when he was arrested, he had with him what purported to be his account of what had occurred. Undoubtedly written sometime after the killing.
This was a man who'd written to me explicitly saying, I want to confess to the murder, a brutal murder, yet when he comes to court, he doesn't want to confess to anything. He wants to plead not guilty. He wants to try and get away with it again.
There's always a degree of apprehension and nerves on the first day of any murder trial, regardless of how confident you are. You always want to do your best for the victim's friends and family. And of course, you never know what a jury's thinking.
To prove their case, the prosecution have to take the jury back to the day of the murder. The prosecution claims an argument broke out between the pair after Michael blamed Stuart for stealing from him.
Stuart Crawford picked up an object and used that to hit out, causing the injuries to Michael Ryan.
Stuart Crawford delivered a minimum of 12 substantial blows to Michael Ryan, to the right side of Michael Ryan's head.
It was a brutal murder, there's no doubt about that.
In the living room, there were 2 areas of bloodstaining, and the scientists concluded that the bloodstaining had been created by impacts into wet blood at a low level. In other words, the deceased was on the ground at the time that he was being attacked. It is totally contrary to self-defense that somebody is on the floor and they're being attacked.
There was so much evidence within that investigation that undermined self-defense. There was no call to the police by Mr. Crawford. There was no call for an ambulance. There was no distress call, ask for help, we've had a fight, he's injured, can he help? What Stuart Crawford chose to do instead was roll him in a carpet and then hide his body, and then calmly go down to the local library and plunder the victim's bank account. Now, having done that, calmly sets about a clean-up operation, takes on the persona of the victim, and then flees the country. Now that is not the action of somebody who has had to fight for their lives.
The prosecution reveals Crawford's motives.
What he wanted to do was go to Thailand. He didn't have the money to go to Thailand. And the only way he could achieve that was by stealing the money. That was the motive for the killing.
It was clear that the motive for this was always greed. We knew that. He defrauded his father in the past. He'd stolen money from the victims. There was no doubt that was the single motive.
But a week after the trial opens, the jury retires.
I remember in all the murder trials and all the murder cases I've been involved in, they returned the fastest verdict I've ever been involved in. I think they retired for 18 minutes.
That's about long enough for the usher to take the jury out of the courtroom, into the jury room, to give them their guidelines and obligations, and then wheel them back into the court. The judge wouldn't have had time for a cup of tea.
The jury's verdict was guilty of murder. That was, in my view, the right verdict. There was very strong evidence against Stuart Crawford.
After the jury's verdict, the judge sentences Stuart Crawford to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years.
He stood there motionless. He had no expression on his face. He looked a bit sorry for himself, but he certainly didn't say anything. We were absolutely delighted with that result. Incarceration is the right place for Crawford. In my opinion, he was the personification of evil.
Michael Ryan was a well-liked, kind, popular, loving family man who'd done everything right in his life, even to the fact that when he was on holiday, he was befriended by somebody who he figured may be struggling, and his kindness was that, if you're down on your luck, look me up and of course I'll help you out. And he was murdered. And he was murdered for his kindness, and he was murdered for his money, and that is just awful.
When a murder is discovered.
She was in the bathtub where the killer had placed her. It just looked bad.
It doesn't just destroy one life.
I couldn't understand why. Why would somebody do such a terrible thing?
It tears communities apart.
You can still speak to residents now, and they say they've never got over it, what happened to a young man in the midst of their little community here.
It's up to the police to not only solve the mystery.
That was our hope, that where we were going was going to provide us with a treasure chest of information.
And track down the killer, but bring them to justice.
The absence of a head or hands in an investigation like this can impede identification, but it certainly doesn't make it impossible.
In this episode, a 38-year-old woman goes missing, but is believed to have been killed.
It was a massive shock, a real shock, I think, for a small city like Exeter to think that something like this could have happened.
We deal with dead bodies all the time, however, not many are in this condition.
Meet the murder detectives.
What you have is a young lady who is in a suitcase which has been deposited on a railway embankment and covered over by twigs and other foliage.
Who reveal how they caught the killer.
It was DNA, it was phone analysis, it was forensics. The police brought an arsenal of investigative tools.
The cathedral city of Exeter in Devon lies on the picturesque River Exe and has been an important centre for the area since Roman times. On August the 8th, 2016, a seemingly routine report came into Exeter Police Station.
We were working on the evening that the missing person report was passed to us to look at, due to finish at 10 o'clock, and like a lot of police shifts, sometimes things don't go as you expect. You're never quite sure what's going to happen, what's going to come in, and it's one of those evenings, and something didn't look right from the outset.
Detective Darren Webb and Deputy SIO Martin Sutcliffe picked up the case 2 days later.
I was approached about a missing person called Gagana Prodanova, and the fact that there were certain concerns and worries about whether or not it was simply a missing person inquiry or whether or not we had something more sinister.
Martin and Darren were told the missing woman was a 38-year-old Bulgarian called Gagana Prodanova. She worked at a local hotel. Xenia Nikolova was a friend and colleague from the hotel.
She shared a lot of things from her life before England. In general, she was pretty chatty. Each morning when I go online to check on messages, if anything happened overnight, I got a message from her, which was really bizarre. Just reading it was so weird. There were so many things that doesn't match. And she was telling me that her mom passed away and everything happened so quickly, so she flew back to Bulgaria and she doesn't know when she's going to be back.
The text message didn't ring true. When Gagana didn't turn up for work, Xenia tried to call and left several messages, but she didn't respond.
We all start worrying. As on the movies, we just had to wait 72 hours and we phoned the police.
Exeter is regarded by locals as a safe place to live. The case was treated seriously.
This is coming into Exeter city centre. Crime levels are managed, I think, really well. There are challenges and there are areas of crime that always need to be looked at and addressed, but relatively I would hope people would enjoy living in Devon and Cornwall.
Anne-Marie also worked at a local hotel and had heard about Gagana's disappearance.
You don't hear of things like that in Exeter. Very, very rare you hear of things like that. It's very safe. You can walk the streets of Exeter very safely 10, 11 o'clock at night. It's a very nice place.
When Martin took on the case, Gagana had been missing for 4 days.
This is the major incident room at Exeter, and when a case breaks, like it did in Gagana's case, obviously it requires an awful lot of attention and a number of police resources, so they'd all converge in this room.
They began a proof of life investigation, which looks at the missing person's lifestyle to see if there had been any recent abnormal activity.
The vast majority of the information, particularly when you looked at a lady that had a lot of contact with people in Bulgaria and phone calls being made, all that had stopped, and this is a lady with 3 children. That in itself was extremely worrying.
The team learnt that Gagana's 3 children were being looked after by their father's family in Bulgaria, while she was working in the UK.
She said that financially they struggle in Bulgaria and the mother is not very well, so they needed more money to cover bills and everything, to take care of the family. So that's why she came over.
Gagana had separated from her partner and had come to the UK. She had been in the country for less than 8 months.
We found Gagana to be nothing other than a very hard-working individual. Everybody would say that about her. She was very dedicated to her job. She would work hard. She loved her children and she loved her family.
Gagana simply wouldn't not turn up to work. By this stage, she'd not turned up for a few days. So all these things obviously were of concern and were part of a consideration as to what we should then do.
Martin began to trace Gagana's last movements. She had a boyfriend in Exeter, so he brought him to the station for questioning and asked him to confirm when he had last seen Gagana.
The new partner gave a full and open account about their plans for that particular day.
Gagana was going food shopping, then planned to see her boyfriend to cook dinner for him, but she hadn't turned up.
The first message he received was around the time that they were due to meet, and that message was certainly written in haste and littered with mistakes, and didn't seem to make sense to him at that time.
Martin made a note of the strange message and checked out the boyfriend's story.
Everything that he mentioned seemed to fall into place when he spoke to other people that had contact with Gagana.
It looked like the boyfriend was not going to be able to provide any leads about Gagana's last 24 hours.
The last person to see anybody alive is really significant in an investigation because they hold a lot of information.
Devon and Cornwall CID had taken statements from Gagana's friends and colleagues, which revealed worrying information about her relationship with the father of her children, a man called Kostadin Kostov.
She suffered a lot in her life, like in the family, being abused physically, and her partner, I should say, he's been abusive like all their life together.
Gagana and Kostov had been together for more than 15 years in Bulgaria, but she had left him to start a new life in Exeter.
The general public tend to believe that abusive relationships evolves around primarily physical violence, whereas actually that's not the case. In a large amount of cases, it can be psychological, so where the perpetrator is controlling the victim through intimidation, coercion. Gaslighting, for example, is where the victim can be so convinced that they are in the wrong that their perception of reality completely changes.
The team discovered 42-year-old cleaner Kostov was no longer living in Bulgaria. He had followed Gagana to the UK and moved himself into her tiny bedsit. He too was brought in for questioning.
When Kostadin Kostov was interviewed, what he was saying to police was Gagana did come home, he remembers that. She was in possession of shopping, but what he went on to say was that she took a phone call when she was there. And once she took that phone call, her demeanour changed, and she explained to him that her mother had died in Bulgaria, and so she needed to leave in order to sort out, obviously, that family matter. He also went on to say that he had given her £250 in order to help her make her way.
As with the boyfriend's story, the detectives thoroughly checked out Kostov's version of events.
And we looked at financially, she was actually paid a lot better than he was. And when I looked at his means to give her that money, it didn't make any sense.
That account didn't stack up, and there were immediate suspicions about his involvement in the disappearance.
With Kostov already at the station being questioned, the team investigated his claim that Gagana had left for Bulgaria.
Just looking into the timings, it wasn't possible for Gagana to get to the airport in the time that Kostadin was suggesting. Looking at her mobile phone records, seeing where text messages had been sent from, where was it at the time these messages were being sent. Those things suggested that Gagana's phone was in Exeter at the time where Kostov had said that she was on her way to the airport. That's not true. She was, at least her mobile phone was in Exeter.
They also contacted her family in Bulgaria.
And we were able to ascertain really quite quickly, and with the help obviously of the Bulgarian community, her mother was still alive.
Martin and the team looked at the evidence before them. Gagana had been reported missing 4 days ago, and the Proof of Life team had not been able to find any trace of her. Kostadin Kostov was lying about her last known movements.
That's when a decision is made. He should be arrested on suspicion of Gagana Prodanov's murder.
In August 2016, in Exeter Police Station, a missing person report about hotel worker Gagana Prodanova had now become something much more serious.
One of the main shifts in the inquiry came from it moving, obviously, first of all, missing person, then to a murder inquiry. A huge consideration was certainly the fact it was a no-body murder.
Now officially a murder inquiry, Martin formed a team of officers. Head of forensics was Ivor Lloyd.
After Kostov was actually arrested, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act initially gives us 24 hours to investigate the crime. That meant there was great pressure on us to try and find something substantive forensically or Gagana or her body within that time before he had to be released.
Ivor and the team's first port of call was the flat Gagana shared with Kostov, in the hope it would reveal evidence of her life or death.
It was a small flat. Must have been very difficult living there, especially with a former partner. It was tidy. She was a hard-working lady. Didn't appear there had been much of disturbance, but of course it had been several days since the disappearance.
Her suitcase is still there. Her backpack is still there. Toothbrush is still there. There was Bulgarian currency there.
This was further evidence that Gagana hadn't left the country. But the flat didn't reveal the forensic clues Ivor was hoping for.
There was certainly no evidence of any blood pattern in the flat. What was there was the items Gagana had purchased in the shop on the night of her disappearance.
As we looked at the natural route that Gagana would have taken, we became aware of the fact she stopped at a food store on the way home.
The team found Gagana on CCTV at the shop. The ingredients she bought were in the flat, but the clothes she was wearing were not.
It made it very, very suspicious. It was evident, unfortunately, that Gagana had probably come to a tragic end.
Kostov had already been in custody for 24 hours, so the team had to apply to the magistrates' court for an extension to hold him longer without charge. If they didn't get it, Kostov would be released.
The enormity of taking on an inquiry where there's no body can't really be understated. All the inquiries you'd normally have to do obviously still exist, but you're also having to determine with absolute certainty and convince people that Gagana is no longer with us without having that physical evidence.
The magistrate granted the extension. Martin had 48 hours left to prove Kostadin Kostov murdered Gagana. Her friends were in shock that Gagana had gone.
My hopes were that he probably been so abusive to beat her up, so she cannot just show up on the next day. But she didn't show up in a couple of days, right? Sorry. This is my hope, that she's gonna be all right, just hiding.
The press were now aware of the missing person investigation, and Martin and the team were hoping that the public might now help to build up a picture of Gagana's movements.
There was an appeal to find Gagana. We were aware that a woman had gone missing, and as a news organisation we helped as best we could. It's part of our role in these circumstances to help the police to find any information they can. We put out a picture, there was CCTV of her final movements, and we did everything we could to try and attract the public's attention to see if Gagana could be found safe and well.
We were under enormous pressure and had to work at full tilt in order to harvest as much as we possibly could.
They already had strong circumstantial evidence, but each line of inquiry would have to be investigated in greater detail.
The background of the domestic violence, the dynamic you've got, there is a motive, the lack of contact with the family. On top of that, you've got someone who is passing you false information about what has happened in the lead up to her disappearance.
Martin put a large team on to trawl 6 days of CCTV for signs of Gagana or Kostov in Exeter. Digital media investigators analysed Kostov's phone, and the Proof of Life team looked at Gagana's behaviour since her disappearance.
So as far as Proof of Life was concerned, the one potential anomaly was the fact that there were messages going out from Gagana's phone after the time that we were quite sure that she was dead.
Gagana's friend Xenia and her new boyfriend had both received messages on the night she disappeared.
The message I got is on Cyrillic, which is our alphabet, and her phone doesn't have a Cyrillic. She always uses the English alphabet.
The contact Gagana's boyfriend had with her on the night she disappeared was also unusual.
The new partner talked about the fact that there was never a voice call, and he requested a voice call. You know, what is this message? Call me. That never happened.
Head of Forensics Ivor Lloyd had to keep all options open.
Most of our attention was trying to identify where Gagana was, where her clothing was from the night that she was wearing, where any possible weapon might be.
A laptop had been recovered from her flat, but her phone was missing.
As we start to look at the phone, it hasn't travelled anywhere, not outside of the Exeter area.
So we had a dedicated team that looked into that side of the inquiry. Through amazing diligence on their part, they were able to inform us that messages sent to both Gagana's boyfriend and work colleague Xenia had originated from the very close whereabouts of Kostov's flat. It was a revelation.
That wasn't all. The digital media investigation revealed another vital piece of evidence.
There was a SIM swap, and there was a SIM card that was placed into Gagana's phone. And the work that was done by the inquiry team showed that we could attribute that SIM card to Kostin Kostov.
Every photograph, every message that you send, it's all data that's available for an investigator. In this case, it was beneficial to the investigation because they were able to show where he was when the phone was being used. They were able to show that the SIM card had been changed over into a different phone. And the one conclusion is that he's actually killed her, or he knows something about her death.
Martin presented this to Kostov, who was in custody.
Why is your SIM going into her handset at a time that we believe that she's dead, or certainly missing, or you're trying to purport to us that she's in Bulgaria? So those key, powerful questions were asked, and Kostin Kostov never ever gave a satisfactory answer as to why that was the case.
As the investigation continued, Martin and the team learnt more about Gagana's life with Kostov.
She suffered all her life, gave birth of 3 kids, lovely kids, and left everything that she knows and everyone that she knows back home to go in a foreign country that she doesn't know anyone.
For her to actually move her entire life here and try and start a life would have been an enormous challenge. Could be that she was fearful for her own life. Maybe she wanted to remove herself from a toxic situation for the benefit of her children.
He was contrived, controlled, and really callous. He spoke about Gagana like she was an object.
What you have is an ex-partner who is controlling, abusive, who has come across to this country in order to seek Gagana out, is aware of the fact that there is a new relationship. And in effect, what's happening is he's losing control of Gagana. And in domestic violence situations, it's a very dangerous dynamic.
He would probably most likely be starting to feel very, very desperate. When coming to England and actually moving into her flat, he probably, to begin with, was very likely to start to evoke power and control over it all over again. And for her, that must have been quite devastating.
Gagana's friends told police that from the moment Kostov had arrived in the UK, he had forced himself into her life.
There was an incident after a barbecue that was held at the new partner's address where he broke up her phones and I think tore up a fair amount of her clothing. Once she'd seen that, a reminder of what she'd faced in her past, that was a key turning point where she wouldn't even consider going back and didn't even stay at that address anymore because she didn't want to be around Kostin Kostov.
The 72 hours were nearly up, and they still hadn't found a body. But Martin never wavered in his belief.
We were confident we'd prove that one, Gagana had died, and secondly, that someone had taken on her identity after she died.
Martin and the team presented their case to the Crown Prosecution Service, who would decide if there is enough evidence to charge.
The CPS lawyer agreed with the police position.
Kostin Kostov was charged with the murder of Gagana Prodanova.
We were aware that a suspect eventually had been arrested, but really we were on the outside looking in. When a major crime like that happens, Devon and Cornwall Police, the major crime investigation team, they keep things very close to their chest.
Ivor Lloyd and his forensics team continued to search for Gagana's body.
a member of the public that was travelling adjacent to a railway line in Exeter city centre, smelt an unpleasant odour and reported it to the police.
Ivor went to investigate.
I arrived, parked up, and instantly could smell something coming across the road, actually, from all the distance. I could see down there in the undergrowth sticks and twigs stacked up but unnaturally and cut as opposed to falling off trees, and they appeared to be camouflaging something black. And when I got closer, I could see it appeared to be a roll-along suitcase. From that suitcase, I could see there was damage to it, and there was some sort of fluid dripping from the suitcase and maggots coming out of the suitcase. It was extremely unpleasant.
Could this be Gagana's body, left to rot in the undergrowth next to the railway line? Ivor and the team were about to find out. In the Devon city of Exeter, Kostadin Kostov had been charged with the murder of his ex-partner, Gagana Prodanova.
Gagana had been missing for some period of time, and if our assessment was correct, dead for a considerable period of time.
Her suitcase had been found near the railway line, and there was a rotten smell in the air. Head of Forensics Ivor Lloyd concluded it was coming from the case.
I was fairly sure that something had died within the suitcase. In the circumstances we had, I started to form the hypothesis that the body within the suitcase could very well be Gagana. At that stage, I didn't want to disturb anything, so I summoned CSI to photograph the scene and record it as it was. I went down to the suitcase and I pulled the suitcase out of its hidey hole, up onto a flatter part of ground to see what we could see. I didn't want to open it air in the outdoors. I wanted it secured and controlled in a mortuary environment.
Ivor informed Martin and the team back at HQ of what had been found. They were hoping the suitcase could answer a lot of questions.
What can we determine about how she may have been killed? Which is why you then have, obviously, a forensic post-mortem dealt with by a Home Office pathologist who will go through and find detail and try and give as many answers as they can in respect of what happened to the deceased.
We deal with dead bodies all the time, obviously, by virtue of the job we do. However, thankfully, not many are in this advanced, decomposed condition. This was extremely trying for the team, very unpleasant, notwithstanding the circumstances, but just actually the state of the body itself. Many thousands of maggots were coming out of the body bag, so it was quite a challenging post-mortem examination.
So decomposition is a continuous process of varying stages that produce different scents, different chemical compounds, different gases. We break the continuous process of decomposition down into 5 stages, the latter 2 being advanced or post-decay and moving towards dry remains.
The climate at that time and the temperature was high. She's in effect in a microclimate within the suitcase, and so deterioration is more rapid.
Once we opened the case, we could quite clearly see what appeared to be a female's body in advanced stages of decomposition inside the case.
Extended periods of decay and decomposition can inhibit the process of identification, but they don't impede it entirely. They certainly don't make it impossible. So from even dry remains, completely decomposed with no soft tissue, we can still look to establish things relating to the biological identity of the individuals.
So in the end, the identification of Gagana to the body in the case was done through DNA. We looked at the toothbrush, which we retrieved from her home flat, and then we compared it to DNA from tissue from the body, and it indeed matched, and it was Gagana.
The police activity in the area had attracted a lot of attention, and the local community became aware of their discovery.
a body had been discovered on a railway embankment in Exeter. That's when we first knew that an incident, a tragedy of some sort had occurred. What we didn't know at that stage was the background.
The team had found Gagana, but the lack of forensic evidence meant they couldn't link her body to their prime suspect, her ex, Kostov.
What you have is a young lady who is in a suitcase which has been deposited on a railway embankment and covered over by twigs and other foliage. How many cases of natural causes would end up with that scenario?
The state of the body meant that the pathologist couldn't determine much else.
We were left in a situation where actually we had no confirmed cause of death. We weren't able to say definitely how Gagana was killed or how she died.
Having now identified Gagana, Martin and the team could now tell her family and friends that she was not missing.
Most importantly, the family could have a Christian burial and could mourn their lost one in a way that they needed to. It's horrific, the news, but the position is then definite.
We expected to hear that maybe, she had gone off with someone or, she was safe and well. But then to hear that, she had actually died, it was a real shock, real shock.
We sent reporters to the railway embankment, the road next to where the body was found, and we knocked on doors. It's part of the journalist's job to get as much information as you can. If you can't find anything concrete out about the actual incident itself, it's common practice to ask people in the street. And of course, they were worried, but the general reaction was one of puzzlement.
Officers began searching through CCTV near the railway siding, hoping to see the suitcase being dumped, while Martin continued to search the area for physical evidence.
When Gagana was found, she was naked, and so part of your consideration there is obviously where are Gagana's clothes?
They could see the clothes Gagana had been wearing at the time she disappeared on the CCTV footage from the shop she was last seen in.
We took a decision to recover what we could in the way of waste, domestic waste, in and around the area where we believe she went missing.
What happens with a lot of investigations, sometimes you need a bit of luck. The investigators in this particular case took the opportunity to stop the bin collection and then collect all the bins up and then go and search through the many tons of rubbish.
And you're going bag to bag. It takes a lot of determination and will to move through and keep your focus and concentration as it needs to be.
Their breakthrough came when they found a bin bag that contained not just clothes, but shopping bags like the ones Gagana had been seen carrying.
The actual bin bag, when they explored it, was open up, and within that was a blue bag. Its appearance was remarkably good for a match for the shopping that she got from the Best One International store.
The clothes were also a match to Gagana's.
Finding the garments that were exactly the same as Gagana was wearing on the night she disappeared was brilliant. When the items were found at the refuse tip and photographed and seized by CSIs, it became evident that they were all actually cut off the victim when she was undressed rather than just being taken off.
Within the same bin bag were other items they felt they could test for DNA evidence.
There were cans located within that bin bag as well, and a Jack Daniels bottle. So all of that potentially can harvest something for us.
Kostov was still in custody, so police continued to search the flat he shared with Gagana.
When suspects are brought in for questioning, under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, samples are collected. So these things, in this case like swabs, would have been taken to look for any kind of DNA, perhaps blood samples. I suspect that they were looking to be able to find a connection between the suspect and either the scene of the crime or the victim.
In Kostov and Gagana's flat, officers found a pair of scissors. They, along with the cut clothes found in the rubbish bags, were sent for forensic examination.
An assessment was made by a forensic scientist about whether those scissors made those cuts, and that came back positive. In addition to that, we looked at the garments for DNA. On the leggings, we found blood which was identified as coming from Costas.
More DNA tests were done on the beer cans found in the rubbish, again looking for a link with Kostov.
Certainly the Carlsberg can was examined to see if the drinker, if you like, could be identified, and again there was a full profile. Huge moment. That was a point where I allowed myself to be at least slightly content with the way it was going.
Martin and the team had now connected Kostov with Gagana's body. Officers examining CCTV of the area had also got a result.
The suspect was identified dragging a roll-along suitcase in the early hours of the morning away from Gagana's home address, and then quite a short time later coming back without the case.
The suitcase seems to be way above a weight which would ordinarily be involved when, well, I don't know, some people like to pack particularly heavy, but it was to the point of being ridiculous.
They were convinced the man seen in the CCTV pulling the suitcase was Kostov and confronted him with the footage.
He refused to admit this or accept it during an interview.
With the CCTV and all the other evidence found at the flat, Martin and the team felt they had enough to go to court.
You can't be 100% certain about how things are going to go.
I mean, it really was one thing after another. There were so many different areas of evidence which showed it was categorically Kostov that committed this terrible crime. Everything pointed towards him.
"38-year-old Gagana Protonova had been found dead in a suitcase, dumped near the railway line in Exeter, Devon.
For months on end, myself, the case officer, and those at the core of the inquiry were basically working at full tilt, like a war of attrition, trying to get everything done. And it was one of the most demanding periods I've ever had in my police career.
The police had found CCTV footage that they believed showed Kostadin Kostov moving the suitcase containing Gagana's body from her flat to the railway siding.
He's not dressed in his normal clothing. He wore a baseball cap, a very tight top, and tried to present physically in a different way to what he ordinarily would be seen on the CCTV.
So we know that when Kostin dumped Gagana's body over the embankment, that he was caught on CCTV walking away, almost strutting and looking almost pleased with himself. I think what we have to remember is it's not necessarily the act of murder that he's feeling pleased about. It's the fact that he has, in his mind, been able to regain power. He's been able to regain control over her.
They didn't consider it could be somebody else. Plus the fact the individual coincidentally walks the vast majority of the distance back to the home address of Kostin Kostov. All that obviously helps paint a picture of who may be responsible.
With this video evidence, Kostov's DNA found on Gagana's abandoned clothes, and proof Kostov had been using her phone, the police felt they had enough to try him for murder.
So after months of preparation and getting the case together, obviously we moved to the trial phase, and this trial was held at Exeter Crown Court.
On April the 20th, 2017, in Exeter Crown Court, the trial began.
The murder trial in Exeter is a big event. It was an extraordinary case because there were two bombshell moments. The first being when the prosecution showed the CCTV of Kostov walking through the town in the dead of night with the suitcase with a body inside it.
It's obviously a very unusual event that someone to choose to take a dead body through a city centre at all. I think there was an element of thought and planning around it, because people walking through this city with suitcases is not that unusual an event. There are a huge number of cameras available to us, which obviously are very useful when you're carrying out criminal investigations.
When Kostov was confronted with the CCTV image of the man with the suitcase, his lawyers said that as no face was visible, it couldn't be proved it was Kostov.
The way the police chose to prove that was to compare images of the defendant, Kostov, on other days as he's making his way to and from work in those locations through Exeter, with images of this man with the baseball cap and the suitcase. And they actually brought a man into court who studied how people walked. This was gait analysis. He went into extreme detail about head movements, arm movements, torso movements, rotation of the knee movements. I mean, who knew these people existed? And the conclusion was that it was overwhelmingly likely that the man in the baseball cap was Kostov.
The police also presented their telephone evidence that showed that Kostov had sent text messages to Gagana's friends and family, pretending they were from her.
Kostov made it quite clear, to me anyway, and I think to the court, that he was trying to portion blame elsewhere and was certainly looking towards the new partner that she had. So as he started to give his testimony and we started to talk about some of the messaging, he actually started to suggest that Gagana was involved in that she actually sent messages with a view to getting him in trouble.
The only trouble in this investigation was that he was going to be arrested for her murder. He did try and suggest that whilst at the flat, it must have been Gagana or another that were actually sending messages.
When the prosecution said, "How on earth do you expect us to believe that it was Gagana sending these messages?" He was the person sending them all along, it was obvious. And to suggest that Gagana was still alive sending messages in her name was ridiculous, to be honest.
After the prosecution had laid out their case, Kostov himself gave evidence in his defence.
It's always a high point of a trial when the defendant gives his evidence, because you know very quickly after he opens his mouth and answers these allegations whether or not he's got a case or not.
The way he spoke in there, on occasions he broke into a smile and a laugh whilst being questioned. That's the person that you're dealing with. That's unbelievable. There was an arrogance there. Did he think he could pull this off? Some people have that narcissistic type of personality where they think, I'm the smartest individual in the room, I will work my way through this. I've done it before, I'll do it again.
He just would not budge from his view that it must be somebody else that he did it. He always seemed to portray that he was a victim somehow of this entire scenario and that everything was Gagana's fault.
By tracking Kostov's phone and those movements with the CCTV footage, police showed he had returned to the suitcase some days after it was dumped.
It was explained that Kostov had returned to the scene of where the suitcase was, and he'd made this search on his phone using the Bing search engine.
The most powerful piece of evidence, arguably, and the impact you could see it had in the court came from the Bing search that was conducted by him on his mobile phone. How long does it take for a human corpse to decompose?
Lord knows what he was thinking when he made this search, because the police, when they went back to examine the evidence, could clearly look at his search history, because he was at the scene where the body was. He was standing literally metres away from where Gagana was decomposing in a suitcase. So why would you make that search? Well, you can imagine how explosive or damning that is as a piece of evidence when the jury hear that.
The court case took 5 weeks. In the end, it was down to the jury to decide whether Kostov was guilty of the murder of Gagana.
One of the challenges is that you almost have to be able to demonstrate how somebody died. Gagana's body was found in a suitcase, so it was quite clear that it wasn't natural. So that in itself helped. They can't say that it's a murder because there's no sign of violence, but by the same token, is it an accident? It's quite clear she was murdered. It's quite clear that she was put into a suitcase and transported to that location, to the deposition site. It probably wasn't as big an issue because of those reasons that they couldn't establish how she died.
So I was there for the duration of the trial. Trials are always very nerve-wracking experiences.
I think he He possibly did think he could get away with it. I don't think he had any sense of the reality of standing in a witness stand in the UK trying to prove yourself to a jury of 12 men and women when you're faced with such a compelling case. At every stage when the prosecution presented its evidence, he was simply moving a step closer to the prison cell.
Once all the evidence had been heard, the judge sent the jury out to consider their verdict.
It's almost like you take a breath. The dynamic has changed. You've gone through, you've done everything you possibly can.
I've sat through hundreds of trials, and you never know until that verdict comes whether or not the jury sees the case in the way that you see it. A person's liberty is at stake here. Everything has to be taken seriously. So when the verdict is delivered, it is high drama, it's pure theatre in a sense.
Under 90 minutes later, they came back into court and were unanimous in a guilty verdict.
It really was such a strong case. So the relief is even greater because it would just be a horrendous miscarriage of justice if he was able to walk the streets knowing what we knew about him in the fullness of Kostov's character. It just wouldn't have been right. Any other verdict other than murder and guilty.
The motive for this case was as old as the hills. It was jealousy.
If he couldn't have her, obviously no one else could. And that's the unfortunate thing. But he's in the right place, and I think we all feel a lot safer that he is there.
And maybe people will learn something from this case, let's say it. People should not accept abuse, mental or physical abuse. You should change it. Immediately cut it off. Don't wait for something bad to happen.
Ngon. Không có xương xảo gì. Đúng rồi, ăn trứng gác với xương, ăn cho nó có canxi. Không ai đấy con, không ai mà nói gì qua con ra đây. Tay cầm gì đó. Không làm gì. Đừng có bà ngoan mất.
lắm lần ông cho gặp xong nó tay nó dính vào dính, cùng nó đổi tay nọ sang anh ấy ôm rất không